The plot keeps thickening with Sam Darnold. What about franchise tag options? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. And thank you so much for hanging out with me all year long. This is the last one of 2024, and hopefully I'll be your first listen of 2025 tomorrow as well. But today is Twitter Tuesday, and that means I'm answering your questions as submitted to me either by email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. I spent a whole bunch of time catching up on emails, so if you emailed me like last week and I didn't get back to you, I am sorry. I might have got back to you now. But otherwise, you can send questions in the Google form that is in the show notes to any episode, or of course you can send them to me on Twitter. Or on Blue Sky at Luke Brown NFL, both places. First question I'm going to do today comes from Steve in Denver, who asked, I contacted you after week 3 and asked you about the chances of the Vikings signing Darnold after the season. If I remember correctly, you said that if the Vikes made it to the NFC Championship game, you could see the Vikings re-signing him. I think I flitted back and forth between that and the Super Bowl, but yeah, something like that. Steve asks, do you still feel that way? Okay, so obviously, like, a lot of circumstances have changed, but the way I felt there is I imagined the world that we live in now, right? Like, what if Sam Darnold plays MVP football and we're really talking about it, right? And he's not going to win. It's Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. It's probably Lamar if you ask me. Hopefully I don't ruffle too many feathers there, but it's one of those guys, right? But he's still like, he's like playing that good, right? So I imagined back then, what if he plays that well? And I went, well, then he probably gets a big contract on the market and he wouldn't want to sign a team-friendly, 2-year Baker Mayfield deal here and then have a rookie nipping at his heels every time he throws an interception. Probably not the situation he'd be looking for. So I still kind of feel that way. Once you get to the like prestige of the NFC Championship or the Super Bowl, things start to get a little different where you go, okay, you kind of have to do this. But one option that has now been floated, Diana Rossini reported at The Athletic that the Vikings are considering this, which is, I think, I think that's significant because while a lot of people have reported, he's playing well enough to make the Vikings, reconsider, or he's playing well enough, to make other executives wonder what the Vikings are going to do. That article always comes out. And it feels like reporting, but it's really just like some guy on the Titans going, yeah, what are they doing over there? That's crazy. He had 2 ACL surgeries, right? JJ McCarthy. And it's like, oh, you don't know at all what's going on. Cool. Why would you? That's the Vikings. The ACL thing pisses me off so much because Adam Schefter misspoke on ESPN and everybody thinks JJ McCarthy tore his ACL. He didn't tear his ACL. Can we please spread that? JJ McCarthy did not tear his ACL. He had a meniscus surgery and then a fairly routine scope thing that people are like way overreacting to. Anyways, he's still very much on track to be ready to go, not by camp, by the spring, like OTAs, like the draft. Like, it's fine. But anyways, the situation with Darnold with the tag is an interesting option, right? I mean, it's going to cost you $40-some million, which is why I pretty much put it out of my mind for a while, maybe too long. But it'll cost you $40-some million. Darnold has no say in that. So he doesn't get to say, yeah, but I think I'm going to go have 7 teams bid on me in the market, which is what he wants. That's going to be what he wants. That's what's best for Darnold, is for him to hit the market. So you have to prevent that, and the only way to do that is with the tag, and you have to be willing to give him that money. Maybe try to work out some sort of longer-term deal that restructures that money or something if you're worried about the cap hit, but the Vikings do have the cap space to withstand that. Kind of changes their plans on fixing corner at defense and in free agency and stuff, but you can kind of deal with that as it comes. And then, you move onward from there. You give JJ McCarthy another year to really develop instead of just rehab. They're fine with that, right? You're looking at guys like Jordan Love or even guys like Darnold and Geno Smith that like kind of blossomed a little bit later in their careers, Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson, that like maybe they should have sat a year. or two. Like it's starting to become a more popular idea, so that's not as much of a deal breaker to the Vikings. But it doesn't make Sam Darnold the long-term guy for the Vikings. Still, that's still J.J. McCarthy. It's just sort of deferring the whole thing for a year, which is exactly the sort of non-decision the Vikings love to make. I could see it happening. However, the next 2 to 3 weeks is going to probably inform this more than everything we've already seen, which is really hard to imagine. But think about it. If Darnold lays an egg next week, Vikings lose to the Lions, and they go on the road, they play, say, Tampa, and he lays another egg, and they're out. We're like not having this conversation anymore, right? Like if that happens, and we're coming off like this total collapse, then it totally changes things, right? So that's not to say that that will happen, but that's to say that this story is yet to be written. There's a long way to go. And I don't think anybody in the Vikings organization is really even trying to think about it yet. They're a little bit focused on doing the whole let's try to make to the number one seed and be Super Bowl contenders thing, which is a very fun conversation to have. That said, Latson asks, how does the non-exclusive franchise tag work, and is it an option for Darnold? So this happened to Lamar Jackson. It is a lower price tag. I think it's the average of the top 10 contracts instead of the top 5 contracts or something like that. So it's a lower price tag, and it gives Sam Darnold the option to go negotiate with other teams. Other teams can sign him to a deal, and then the Vikings get the option to match. It's a lot like the like free agent tenders that you get for like undrafted guys or, seventh round picks or whatever that got cut or something like that. But that gives the Vikings the option to match. And if they don't, Darnold becomes a player for that team, and that team gives the Vikings 2 first-round picks. So that's actually a pretty interesting option. It's a lower thing. Nobody's going to do the 2 first-round picks. They didn't even do it for Lamar Jackson. Okay, they're not going to do it. And you might think, oh wait, but aren't we exposing you for somebody? Like somebody could technically, quote unquote, offer Sam Darnold a contract and then like force you to match. I believe the player would have to play ball to do that. And so, Darnold would just have to like be cutting his nose off to spite his face for some reason, then like making the Vikings pay more and then like screwing them over. That would not be a great way to foster a business relationship. That kind of thing hasn't happened that I know of. Like it's, poison pills are a thing of the past. But yeah, I would say that it absolutely is an option. Sam asks, in his post-game press conference, Matt LaFleur credited the Vikings' defensive success, saying that they played more man than we anticipated. How much of this falls on the coaching staff's game planning versus the players' ability to adjust mid-game? Yeah, so the Packers adjusting or planning for a lot of zone, perfectly sensible thing to do. The Vikings playing man coverage, so they have played more man coverage lately. So perhaps the Packers underreacted to a change the Vikings have made within the last month. But one of the hypotheses, Tyler Fornes has been talking about this a lot over at A to Z Sports. One of his hypotheses is that it was about Stephon Gilmore being out and then Fabian Moreau being in, and maybe that was a better fit for him or something. But they continued to do this with Gilmore in. So I think the real truth now is that they just have found confidence in these corners they didn't think they'd have earlier in the season. And the Packers maybe just didn't think that would continue. Or maybe the Packers thought, yeah, they're doing that against the Bears and the Titans and, these teams with receivers you're not necessarily as worried about. But our guys are better, so they're going to zone off against them because they don't think they can match up. And the Vikings thought they could match up. So the Packers showed up with a game plan with more zone beaters prepared, and they had to move to their man beaters. I don't know if they ended up moving to their man beaters or if they went, we don't really want to run stuff we didn't practice all week. I think that's a pretty tough decision to make. I understand both sides of that one. But yeah, always not great to get kind of caught out of your prep. Joe Green asks, what did everyone miss about this team preseason? This is more than just the QB, yeah? I mean, yeah, for sure. Even just in that last example, the Vikings didn't even realize that their corners would be this good. They were like ready to zone off and like not ask Gilmore and Griffin to do anything. But these dudes played 2-man like a lot. They played 2-man a lot against the Seahawks too with Stephon Gilmore. And that's like that's Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf and Smith and Jigba's playing well. Like that's a lot of good players. And the Vikings were like, actually, we can kind of handle these guys. So I think the corners played a lot better than you thought. I think you're getting a lot better play up front than you thought. Like, I don't know, man, we're getting like stuff out of Jalen Redmond and Jerry Tillery. Who saw that coming? You know, players without the pedigree and without the name recognition are doing more. Part of that, they're being put in good positions schematically, but it's not it's not like they're just being schemed up to succeed. Guys are just playing better than we thought they would. And congratulations to them. Maybe they worked really hard in the offseason and they improved. Maybe they're just in exactly the perfect role for them. It's kind of different guy to guy, but is working. They have right pieces in the right places and the thing is singing. Doesn't have to be more complicated than that. John Patterson asks, what do you put the Vikings odds of winning the Super Bowl at? I'm not an odds maker. I'm not much for predictions, so I'll leave this to the books. FanDuel has them at plus 800. You can think of that as 9-1. 9-1 odds. 1 out of every 9 times that the Vikings will be in this situation, they will win the Super Bowl. That might seem really like long shot, but it's 6th highest in the league. Like the Chiefs have the highest Super Bowl odds in the league per FanDuel, and they're plus 370. That's almost 4-1 odds. So that's the best it gets, which is why I think the heuristic of, if you don't think that the Vikings are going to win the Super Bowl, they should start selling pieces. And you're starting to see this discourse on teams that are having bad seasons like the Titans and the Saints and stuff. I always think it's dumb because you're never likely to win the Super Bowl. Even the best teams in the league aren't likely to win the Super Bowl against the field of the other 13 teams in the playoffs, right? It's hard to pick it right. That's why Vegas makes money. I got a lot more questions that I am going to get to, so I'll try to flash through as many as I can of your questions. I'm not getting to all of them. I had over 100 questions. I'm not getting to all of them, but I'll get to as many as I can. Love you all very much. So thank you so much for participating so much in these. Means the world to me. We'll get into it next. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. So if you have stuff that you signed up for 2 years ago that you meant to cancel the free trial on, and it's actually been charging you this whole time and you didn't even notice because it was only $10 a month, but that happens to all of us, right? We've got all these things and then they pile up and suddenly you have all these expenses that you're just wasting money on. Rocket Money can help you find and square away all of those things and also help you track your spending, lower your bills, and help you figure out where you can cut back so that you can meet your personal finance goals. They have their subscription tracker, which they use to cancel services, and also their goals feature, where they can help you automatically set money aside for the future. So your savings would auto pay like a bill. You never have to think about it again, and you don't have to stress about budgeting every month. It just takes out what you're going to take out, and the rest you have is what you have to work with, and you can track it from there. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Moving right along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. You can head over if you want some video content. You can go to patreon.com/LukeBrunnNFL. Everything there right now is for free, and I'm working, as we speak here, I'm working on some recap stuff from the Packers game. That'll go up this week. I took last week off because of the holidays, obviously, but we are back in full swing. We're going crazy, okay? I've been laid up sick for 4 days, and I'm stir crazy now. So the energy is bubbling, and I'm going to put that energy into Patreon for you all. Let's move on here with Twitter Tuesday on the Locked On Vikings podcast. The next one comes from Adam Percott, who asks, do we have a Patrick Jones update? Yes, we do. So Kevin O'Connell did his press conference and said that they actually got some good news on his knee. He was worried about it after the game. They said he's probably going to miss some time, and that looked a little bit pessimistic, but they got some good news. They said there's actually a chance he plays on Sunday against the Lions. BT Dubs, if you missed it, the Lions-Vikings game was flexed to Sunday night, as everybody expected, so make your plans accordingly. And there's a chance Patrick Jones is in it, but if there's a chance he's playing Sunday, it feels pretty good that he's going to play in the playoffs. I don't think the Vikings anticipated that, so we love to see it. Plus, guys like Fabian Moreau are coming back. Aaron Jones had his little quad contusion. Kevin O'Connell seemed very optimistic that he was going to be fine and good to go for the Lions, but obviously it's weird, how much Cam Akers is there going to be and stuff. That's going to be a weird one to bet on. We'll get to that in the Zoever under on Friday. Grill asks, is Week 18 the greatest or most significant regular season game in Vikings history? It's got to be, right? I was thinking about this, and I don't remember a time that, I don't remember a time ever between any teams that you had a Week 18 game for the 1 seed, that it worked out that way. because it's usually not in the division. It's so hard, right? One of you has already handed the other one a loss. And, I mean, like the division's beating itself up, right? Like that you all hand each other losses. So it's really hard for two teams to be this good outside. You need those gaudy stats about the NFC North being like 34-4 outside of games with each other, that kind of stuff. But that's where we're at. So I don't remember this happening like ever. But in terms of the most significant regular season game, it's kind of hard to compete with like a do or die, like winner goes to the playoff, loser goes home kind of deal. Or I think about like, 2018, the last week of the season against the Bears, win and make the playoffs, lose and go home. Like that's your season, right? So the punishment for losing is bigger than the punishment would be for losing on Sunday, which is that you still are in the playoffs. You're just a lower seed and you got to go on the road. You're playing for home road privileges and a bye, right? Like that's big, but that's not as big as you don't get to play any football games anymore. But the one seed's never been on the line, right? So the prize for winning is as big as it's ever been, but the punishment for losing has been bigger. I don't know how you want to define that in terms of the most significant game in Vikings history, but I don't know. Feels like I'm kind of splitting hairs. Like this nothing like this has happened. That's your instinct. Yeah, that's true. Packers fan Tears asks, what has happened to our boy wonder Will Reichard? Good question. Here's the deal. 57, I'm not killing you over that. 55 hitting the upright, not killing you over that. And 57 hit the crossbar, by the way. Missing from, or 43 hit the crossbar. It's like not a terrible miss, right? It just hooked on him a little bit. My guess, this is a total guess, okay? Don't take this to the bank. But last time I looked at this, he was planting maybe just a scotch close to the ball, and that makes his leg come back through weird. It's also the same thing I think happened on the Blair Walsh kick, but to a way more extreme degree. But I think maybe he's either planting there or he's maybe planting a little bit too far forward, but none of that looked egregious to me. But that's a change in alignment. And if you need to change it, or you just kind of kick your way through it and they'll come back around eventually. That's the thing. But also these misses, he's not missing terrible. The 43 one's a tough miss, but it was a close miss. And the over 50 misses are over 50. Like you're not going to make all of those. So I'm not panicking yet at all. Landon Renly asks, what does DVOA mean? And why do Packers pundits keep trying to use it to negate the results of actual football games? So DVOA was developed by Aaron Schatz. It's a stat developed by Aaron Schatz. It was developed at Football Outsiders. I think he sold it. It's at Fantasy Pros now, I want to say. Sorry if that's wrong. But DVOA, you can think of it as yards per play with context. Kind of like EPA per play, although EPA per play performed better than DVOA in most like predictiveness and stability measures and stuff. So I prefer EPA per play. But DVOA is a similar deal. While EPA per play tells you how did you get closer to scoring is essentially the question that EPA per play asks. The question that DVOA asks is, did you do better in that situation than other teams do? Just kind of a different way of contextualizing the same thing. Hey, 4 yards on 2nd and 8. How good is that? That's like the question, right? EPA per play says, well, teams on 2nd and 8 score this often. Teams on 3rd and 4 score this often. What's the difference? That's your EPA. That's the EPA for that play. DVOA says, well, teams on 2nd and 8 from the 30-yard line typically get 5 yards. You got 4, so you didn't do well. Like that's the logic of DVOA. But really it's yards per play with some additional context to adjust for the I got 10 yards on 3rd and 15 and I punted, but it's a 10-yard play, so it looks good on the box score kind of effect. Steven Utzi has a couple. The first one is, with 4:48 left in the 4th, Darnold throws incomplete. There's a neutral zone penalty on 4th down. If they ran on 3rd, would they have been able to take 40 seconds plus another 25 seconds after the penalty? Does the clock restart after defensive foul late in the 4th? So I think yes, in the situation you're putting together. So basically the way it works is if the clock was running, it keeps running. If it wasn't running, it stops running. There are some exceptions to essentially prevent you from abusing that. like the 10-second runoffs and stuff. But in that situation, they stop the clock to enforce the penalty, and then they'll restart it. So if you're on offense and there's a defensive penalty, let's say, on like a tackle inbounds, and let's say you decline the penalty, so they just like stopped the clock for you or whatever. I do think the clock does reset when the ball is set, but you now get the time to do your huddle, call a play, do your whole thing. You can be right on the ball and snap it right away, so no clock actually runs. I think that's how it works. Obviously, there's like a whole bunch of exceptions for like situations and stuff. But if you have, the control of the ball and you're trying to run clock, yeah, you can then just let 40 seconds run off of it in that situation. Stephen Utzi also asked, if the final Akers throw is incomplete, would you go for it on the 4th down? Basically the exact same Detroit scenario where they punted and lost. I don't think punting was wrong there. I don't think punting would be wrong here, but I'll tell you what, I'm very glad that I don't have to be the guy making that kind of decision, because that's a really, really tough one. Can you get 3 yards where it matters, right? And I think the distance is very important. 4th and 1, yeah, maybe I take a different tune. 4th and 3 is a little bit tougher to get when you got to have it, and you're basically in field goal range. Like you are like at midfield there, so you're losing the game. You're up 2. They don't even need a first down. They need like 8 yards and they can kick. You are losing the game right there. So I don't think that the risk is worth the reward. I'm a big fan of moments where you can just go for it and, win the game. But I'm less of a fan if it's go for it and not get it and immediately lose the game, right? It's kind of the equivalent of you score a game-tying touchdown, but you go for 2 to go for the win, where I'm really 50-50 on that decision, and it depends a lot on how you feel about how your offense is doing, how you feel about that short yardage play call that you have, and that's a 2-yard play. Well, this would be a 3-yard play, and that's like pretty different. So I don't like going for it. It would be spicy. I would respect it, but I don't think that I personally would have that. I would punt and let's go, get a defensive stop, which we've done literally every time but one, which was the Lions. When we needed a stop, we got it. That's, the interception against the Seahawks. They got it against the Jets, the Jaguars, all of it. I have a few more questions that I want to make sure that I get to, so that'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Moving right along here on the Locked On Vikings Twitter Tuesday podcast. Thank you all so much for hanging out. The next question comes from Eldon Mosshart, who asks, what did you notice from the O-line that made such a difference in pass pro this game? So I'll be perfectly honest, I'm behind on tape, so I can't give you a great answer to this, but I'm going to try to circle back on it tomorrow. So come tune in for that. But what I will say about this game is that the Packers have a pretty well-documented pass rush problem. This is not the team that necessarily is going to give you the biggest pass rush challenge. And that's not trash talk. I mean, you can listen to Packers analysts. Like, the questions they're asking right now are like, what's wrong with Rashawn Gary, right? Like, they're starting to have those conversations where it's like, hey, our star was supposed to be good. Is he hurt? Like, what's going on? Like, we've had those conversations ourselves when a player we expected a lot from suddenly isn't playing that well anymore. That is kind of what they're going through. And, hey, what about Carl Brooks? Like, why isn't he giving us what we thought he was giving us? And Kingsley Enigbar and all those other guys over there. There's criticisms coming to Jeff Hafley about that, because it's really just 4-man rush and stunts is all he likes to do. And is that dynamic enough? Like, so they have a problem there. But in terms of what the Vikings did offensive line-wise, I don't have a great answer for you, but I am curious about the same thing, and I will watch it when I kind of get through the backlog of stuff I got to do after the holidays. Ross Hammerstedt asks, is Hockenson as good post-injury as pre-injury? Yeah, I would say so. The drop, he had a drops issue in 2023 that has not really shown up. He had one bobbly catch. I think he's a one drop this year that bothered me. That's way better. So there's that. But if you're asking like if he's lost a step of speed or anything like that, doesn't seem to be. He's reasonably fast for a tight end, but he was never going to be the fastest guy on your field. You don't really expect that from him. He uses his size well to create separation. He's a very good separator for a tight end. And as a blocker, he's still probably just okay, but you can put him in a run play and it's not going to ruin the play every single time. So you feel good about that. And that leads to a guy that can put up 100 yards when you need him to. We take those, especially considering what you're paying him. Like, you need a guy that can you can put the game on his shoulders if you have to put it on his shoulders. And sometimes I think he's going to do these like disappearing acts when you don't have to put the game on his shoulders. Cause like Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison are putting up like dueling 100-yard games. That ain't no problem. Nobody is sad about that. Next one comes from Red and Purple, who asks, if KOC adopted some of the running scheme of Kyle Shanahan, would that take away from the passing scheme KOC is running? So the O'Connell run game is still pretty simple compared to the Shanahan run game. Kyle Shanahan is using a lot more motion, a lot more exotic formations, weird mix-em-ups. Like, he's trying to find a way to generate opportunities in the run game with plays that he's only gonna like call like twice. It's almost the way defensive coordinators dial up pass rush plans. And like a lot of the angles and geometry of it is actually really similar. So I like thinking about it that way, but O'Connell's not doing any of that. For him, the run is a setup to the pass. And for the Vikings, because they've been able to generate so much push, they've been so physical up front this year. They've been pushing guys around all year long. And I think this Packers game was a return to what they did to, say, San Francisco and Houston back in the beginning of the year. Because they've been able to do that, they have just kind of been able to run simple duo and get 7 a pop. So they haven't had to do any of that fancy stuff, but that's a player thing, not a scheme thing. To answer your question, so like that's the difference to me. And to answer your question about like, would that take away from the passing scheme? Well, yeah, those extra complexities, you'd have to install them, you'd have to teach them, and that takes time. It's precious practice time that you can't now use on an extra, subversion on a pass play and on extra diversity there. So O'Connell it's the key resource is time to install. And I think that's what O'Connell is like pouring a lot more into his pass game, where Shanahan's putting more into the run game there. And so, yeah, I do think that would take away from the pass scheme. You have to simplify it a little bit just because you don't have time to teach all that. Fear the Sun God asks, he's a Lions fan if you can't tell, how many times are you going to bring up Dagger this week? Yeah, so sorry, buddy, probably not much. I've kind of spoken my piece on Dagger. If you want to know the thing about Dagger, it hasn't changed. The Vikings have been seeing Dagger all year long. It hasn't worked as well. They have papered things over with Tampa 2. Somebody else asked, like, what do we do about Dagger? So here's the Dagger deal. But if you want more, I did a whole big Patreon video on it after the Lions game last time, as well as a video, or as well as an article at Wide Left called The Dark Matters of Dagger, where I go into a whole thing of cosmic horror. Just work with me. But here's the spark notes. So the Vikings have 3 coverages that they like to run a lot. Quarters, cover 2, Tampa 2. Dagger is good against all of those coverages. They do like cover 3, but they like cover 3 less than anybody else in the league. They still run like 30% of the time, but that's less than everybody else. So running Dagger against the Vikings, great opportunity. The first Packers game, they ran it 10 times, literally 10 times. It's insane. But Tampa 2 in particular has a very good answer to that, which is that the pole runner, the guy in the middle, that's kind of the deeper hook zone player, can run with a vertical, but he won't run with that clear out if it's the only vertical. So he can stay and rob the dig that comes over. The safeties can very easily bracket that vertical horizontally. They both run with it. If it's the only vertical, that's all they have to do. So it's easy peasy. And you can cover Dagger that way. That's how Kamu Grugier-Hill picked off Jordan Love in week 4. But it's kind of a hard play to make for that pole runner, because you got to let a vertical runner go right through your zone and not like bite on that. That's very hard to do. It's like goes against like every instinct you have as a defender. So yeah, the play isn't always there to be made. You have to execute it properly. So Dagger's still kind of good against Tampa 2, and it's very good against cover 2 and quarters. So it's still kind of just a beater. But they have been solving this by calling more Tampa 2, which is what I was calling for in the first place. But I've kind of spoken my piece on that. So the more it happens, I'm just going to keep linking to the same article. So go just look at that or watch the video. The problem with Keyshawn Nixon asks, in all honesty, from what you've seen on tape so far, what do you think that do you think the comments made by Jair's injury replacement, oh wow, were in the spirit of rivalry, or was he truly not familiar with Darnold's game? So I think you're referring to Keyshawn Nixon said to, I think it was a sideline report or something in the locker room, like, that she asked, like, what is going to be, like, what is the challenge of facing Sam Darnold? And he was like, oh, I don't know if there's a challenge or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And then obviously Darnold goes on to have a career day. So, old takes exposed. It's trash talk. It's a cornerback, dude. Cornerbacks never have a grip on reality, nor should they. That's like one of the positions where you have to get burned to hell and then play with the exact same amount of confidence on the next rep. And the second you don't, you become a Caleb Evans in late 2023. Like, that's how that happens. It's fine. It's trash talk though. Like, who cares? It's trash talk. And like for me, you guys probably sense this, but I don't really like the trash talk element. I did it once with Peter Bukowski a couple years ago, and I like hated it. And a lot of you liked that episode, and I don't want to yuck your yum, but like that was not like an enjoyable way to do content for me, and it's not the kind of guy I want to be. There are a lot of content creators out there that will go do a bunch of trash talk and go, write a bunch of checks they don't know if they can cash. But that's not going to be me. I just don't find it substantive. I don't really find I get anything out of it. Other than, I'm making predictions that if they do come true, nothing happens. And if they don't come true, I'm going to get flooded with 40 million comments. Why would I play that game? The ROI is not there. But y'all have fun. Don't let me yuck your yum, okay? That's your thing. Have a great time, but I'm probably not going to join you. Anonymity Rando asks, would you ever consider live stream commentary during games? Yeah, I would. There's actually a YouTube feature with YouTube TV that they're experimenting with. Once that comes out, assuming that the rights and all that works out, I would love to try that kind of thing. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered before that can be a reality, but yeah, I'm definitely interested. I don't know, stay tuned for that sometime in the deep future. And the last one comes from Mario, who asks, last Twitter Tuesday of the year means it's time for sentimental questions. This is the last thing of the 2024 calendar year. What is the biggest thing you learned about podcasting / covering the Vikings in 2024? I learned so much in 2024. Most of the learning time of the year is early in the year when I'm covering the draft. That's when I'm learning a lot about technique. I'm learning a lot about players. I'm doing a lot of like asking gurus, hey, what happened on this play? And then they'll go into some long diatribe about what's actually going on. And I learn a ton that way. I learned so much about quarterbacking because this was a quarterback draft for the Vikings. So I did at Wide Left a series of 6 articles on each of the 6 major draft quarterbacks: Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, and Michael Penix. I wrote one on each of them, from biomechanics with Penix to I wrote about JJ McCarthy and deep throwing and like really detailed stuff about how you want to cock your shoulders and how it's different from a regular throw, and Caleb Williams and the scramble drill, right? Like how you want to keep your depth. If you deepen, you got to carve it back down. How you want to keep 2 hands on the ball. How teams scheme out their scramble drills, because it's not just schoolyard. There's actually like a rule set to it. And so on and so forth. The Bo Nix one was interesting. It was about pre-snap reads. I had to draw on a lot of resources for that, and I learned a ton about quarterbacking. I feel like talking about quarterbacking now compared to where I was this time last year when I was just starting that project. I think I wrote the first one, the Michael Penix one, in like late December last year. So it's basically a calendar year since then. Is just totally night and day. The way I talk and understand quarterbacking now feels like is grown leaps and bounds. And I always have the goal to reflect. My goal for myself is I want to look at what I was saying 2 years ago and say that guy's an idiot, because that means I've learned a lot. That means I've grown a lot. And I still think I'm there. I still think the stuff that I was saying in like the 2022 draft cycle about Lewis Cine and Andrew Booth was pretty rudimentary, and I'm not very proud of it anymore. And I think that's exactly where I want to be. So here's to another year of that. And I don't know, 79 more. We'll see what happens. I'll get to you tomorrow. Everybody have a happy new year. Be safe. Please be safe on the roads, especially. This is one of those holidays. So take care of yourselves. Love you. And as always, Skull.